Hello, and welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that supports people navigating herpes stigma, and we teach people how to go about communicating about their sexual health. We also educate and train health professionals on delivering a stigma-free sexual history and incorporating stigma-free approaches into their health care with patients. Hello, I have been I've been doing a lot. If you follow me on social media, you see the updates. I'm Courtney Brain on Instagram now and hopefully on TikTok soon. We got to just make sure that that name is available. It hasn't been for a really long time. I've been a lot of different things. And one thing that I will say that I am no longer is confused. For a while, I was very much confused about my identity in the spaces I occupy. Y'all probably thought I meant something else. Let me clarify. So I have I've been in all types of career fields, right? Like one of my first jobs was actually helping my dad with putting floors in. In high school, I sold cookies. I made $300 a week in 2006, 2007, baking and selling cookies. And after that, I worked at Kohl's. I worked in retail, but I worked very unconventionally. So I got a lot of unconventional jobs. And even there, I was at the night shift. Like there were very few times where I was working the cash register. It was like Black Friday when they needed people. And then after that, my first jobs were in advertising. So I was in the advertising field. I've sold digital advertising. I've worked at ad agencies. And that's been my career up until I left the corporate world and I started to work as a personal trainer, which shortly after that led to me going into yoga teacher training and learning to teach yoga. And then I started the podcast around that time and became this person running a nonprofit in the realm of sexual health, sex education, and now I'm like seen as a sex educator and public health professional as well. And I also recently started yoga therapy school. So there have been a lot of different hats that I've worn. And with all these different hats that I've worn, I've been trying to figure out a place to squeeze all of these aspects of my identity in. And the place that made the most sense to me has been through Something Positive for Positive People. So I often talk about that time where I wasn't recording podcasts. I did a podcast episode on that if you want to check that out. And I now have clarity around where these things belong because I've tried to separate everything. I've tried to make everything make sense in one way. And over all this time, like it's been tough. It's been really challenging. And I have board members. They very much are active and involved in my work. They look out for me. I have people around me who I consult things with, but for the most part, everything that is in action is done by me. I manage the social media. I talk to the people. I've taught the yoga classes. I've done the workshops, and so much of my identity has been in the same way that I tell y'all, don't make herpes your identity. I've made it my identity. I've just done it in a way that is for a cause or purpose, or that has been healing and supportive to me. Whereas, the inverse of that would be making it your identity and then avoiding actually living your life. So in a way, like I've not really been living my life because there's been so much attachment to the work around herpes and my identity as a person who has herpes, who happens to be open about it, who I allow others to dictate my identity and who I am exclusively in relation to my herpes diagnosis. And there have been several times where, people ask me, what do you do? People ask me, who are you? And my default has always been going to the herpes related work that I do. Which, don't get me wrong, it's a great conversation starter. More often than not, people are curious and we engage in really good conversations and dialogue about it. I've had people tell me that they too have herpes and that they too had experienced suicide ideation, or that they've never heard of anyone teaching yoga to people with herpes, or who had a podcast about herpes, or is using this as something to support the healing of other people. And so much of my ego, I would say, has been tied into that, because it's like, okay, well, how can I do more of that? This is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. This is the right thing. I need to continue to do more of this. How can I stuff more of what I do into something positive for positive people and make it better, make it more, make it bigger? And the reality is that this is an ugly thing. Nobody wants to have herpes. Herpes stigma is so complex that there will never be a place for all of the things that I want to put into something positive for positive people to really be able to flourish. It's like I'm trying to plant trees and grow and water trees, and some things grow out of shit, but this isn't one of those things. And I've come to realize over the past several weeks, I started yoga therapy training. I remember when I was in yoga teacher training, there were lots of reflections for me that led to me doing things a little bit different than I had been. And it was very self-reflective of me. And I hadn't really had any opportunities or spaces where I, especially as a man, as a Black man, could have these kinds of reflections, because I've always been on go mode. It's always been about, everybody else and what other people expect of me. And that started with make sure you go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a job. And I think it got a little confusing there. That's when I started to question things and go off the track of, get the house, get the wife, had the kids, and retire, right? And I'm in that now. And so much of this is a little bit like confusing to navigate, simply because there hasn't really been a roadmap for me that anyone else, at least in my immediate circle, has navigated. Like, I'm the only person that's bounced around and moved to different cities, chasing my dream or following my intuition and leading with that. And I don't know other people who have. Like, it's not a safe thing. And also, I have met some really self-aware people, but I don't know that they've been self-aware enough to know that whatever it is that they're doing, it's gonna work out, right? And I feel that. I really feel that in the core of my being. I feel that in my nervous system. And part of that has been through just the emotional awareness that's come from me doing some very unconventional things. I'm a Black heterosexual man that's been in all these sex positive spaces, non-monogamous spaces, as well as into places that straight men typically don't belong, but also in working in sex education, being a man, being a Black man too, in this environment that talks about us, but doesn't necessarily talk to us in order to really make any kind of a significant impact. And so I see just how me 7 years ago, before I really entered this space, I look at myself, now, and I look at myself then, and where I am now. If I were to go back and have a conversation with myself, I wouldn't be trying to hear any of that stuff that I was trying to say. I wouldn't be hearing that, you're gonna get herpes and it'll be okay, and that people who have herpes can have fulfilling lives. This whole thing about stigma being an issue, even mental health and suicide ideation, right? Like, to me, 7 years ago, suicide was white people shit. And here I am now, 7 years later, and I'm hosting men's emotional wellness symposiums, and I'm learning about men's struggle with suicide ideation, and people having these experiences, and Black people too having these experiences. But there hasn't been anything in place that would have given me the steps along the way to get to this open-mindedness and receptiveness that I feel in this moment, in this place that I'm at 35 years old. I'll be 36 in November. When I was 27 years old, 20, even, what was that, 11 years ago when I first got my herpes diagnosis, at 23, 24 years old, right? Like, you couldn't have told me that my life would have looked the way that it does. Like, in my mind, I was about to have 5 kids. I was going to be promoted at my job. And there were a lot of things that I just wasn't prepared for going into the world. And I had to experience the things that happened for me after my herpes diagnosis in order to learn and get the skills that led to me becoming who I am today. And I mentioned like the steps in between. So just to give you an example, yoga, for instance, I wouldn't have gone to a yoga class if you told me that, oh, well, yeah, it's going to help you with managing your emotions and all of that. I wasn't trying to hear that. I went to yoga because I thought it was good for stretching. And I needed to stretch. And after I got my herpes diagnosis, I learned that yoga was good for stress management. So I would go to a yoga class, I'm stretching, and this was my entry point. And then after that, I feel just like different. I can't put words to it yet, but I know I feel different. And that's where the stress management comes in. And we're in there just stretching, and then we do Shavasana at the end of class where we just lay there and rest after the yoga class. And I'm like, man, I really like that resting. I really need to make more time for that. We do breathing exercises, and I learned, my posture is different. Like, I feel like I'm taking more full breaths. I feel more alive. And then we go into meditation. It's like, man, I'm loud in my head. I really need to work on calming my mind. And then we get into philosophies. It's like, yeah, I kind of agree with that too. I find peace in that. And then I learned the language and the words. And now a curiosity and interest has been developed because now I'm invested in it, right? So we've had from yoga being about stretching to stress management to breathing to meditating to sitting still to these philosophies. That's 6, 7, 8 steps right there before we get to the point of me being approached about entering a yoga teacher training. And in that yoga teacher training, I would say I probably hit like a huge growth point for myself because of all of the self-reflection that was there. I incorporated a lot of what I learned through yoga, from not just the putting myself in postures or telling people, here's how you get into this posture, here's how you do these things, but more so embodying, what feels to be more true for me and detangling everything that isn't true for me and allowing for my identity, the work. When people say do the work, what they mean is you really have to detangle the truth from what is what's like other people's truths about you. Not even truths, because they're just opinions. Only you know what your truth is. I listen to this dating coach, his name's Mr. Lucario. Shout out to him. And he says the truth is inside of you. It ain't nothing that is more, there's nothing more true than that. And yoga was something that, a seed was planted, and then I find this content that's like validating that. So as you start to experience and explore your own truth, what happens is that you start to be presented with opportunities for you to validate that truth or invalidate that truth, which is essentially going against your values and who you are. And so I had all these layers of things that were not even layers, steps. Let's call them stepping stones to get to a place of being able to enter the yoga world, right? Beyond, because if you look at it, it's white women doing Pilates. If you see yoga presented to you in a lot of instances, you don't see the active listening components. You don't hear about the philosophy. You don't hear about, the practices to live a better life or to identify your own emotional responses to things that indicate to you, hey, you need to make a change. You don't listen to your body. You don't connect with it to know that this pain in your chest is actually because you're holding on to some type of anger, because you're doing a lot of things that you don't want to be doing, but you're doing them anyway because you feel like you got to do them. And when we get to those feelings, like, we can start to really make some changes in our lives. And just making changes in our lives seems to be really vague. I'm using myself here as the example because, one, this is my podcast. I can say whatever the hell I want to on my podcast. But two, this is what I have the most experience with. And I think that we live in a day and age where a lot of people have more experience with other people's lives, whether that be an influencer, celebrity. You know more about these people than you know about yourself. And I found myself even today distracted because I I have barriers and resistances to recording this podcast episode because, I mean, the topic was supposed to be like one specific thing, and that's just me being open and vulnerable about my identity crisis, right? And then it was hard for me to do, and I would catch myself just scrolling social media, scrolling Instagram, and then I was like, oh, I need to talk about this, I need to talk about this. And I started just talking about things, one of which was when you schedule for a donation-based support call, you need to make the donation before we schedule a call. I'm going to be very strict with that because now, and my girlfriend got on me about this. She said, Courtney, you too nice. You too nice. I say this with love. And I'm like, nah, you know, people will do the right thing. People will do what they say they're going to do, and they'll donate. But it's been way too many times now where, you know, we had these calls. I meet my end of the bargain, but other people haven't met theirs. So you got to make your donation before we have our donation-based support call. That's why the word donation-based is in there. But I ended up making a story post about that, and then also talking about the algorithm of social media, because as I was scrolling, I recognized that since being in a relationship and like unfollowing things that are more, you know, just like more sexual, more sexually charged, because I'm seeing sexual energy as creative energy. And I recognize like how social media and media in general, the way that it's designed, like I look at the content I put out. I don't put out anything that really like distracts you or pulls you away. I put out content that sends you on that journey within, the self-reflective portion, the components about, you know, real information and truth. And I don't support what the algorithm's intention is, which is to keep you engaged with the content for long. I encourage you to get off that. I encourage you to go and do your own thing. I encourage you to show up to a thing that, you know, an event of some sort that may give you a sense of community in a way that you don't have to rely on what social media presents or what distractions or anything like that. Like I'm recommending books you should read and listen to, and I'm sending people away from the place that the algorithm is designed to steer you into. So in doing that, I made the post about that, and I was still just sitting there like not wanting to do this, and I realized what was happening for me. I always say the hardest part about running a business isn't actually running a business. It's, you know, telling other people that you're running a business, especially when you compound like something as complex as stigma to it, because I do a lot of great work. I know that I'm the best. You can't tell me there's anybody out there that's providing you with better herpes stigma support than I am. And if you met them, please introduce me to them, because I would love to learn from them. And these, at this point, I'm not gonna say thousands, I'm gonna say hundreds of like one-on-one support calls. It's very much become like my test of truth, because I say, yeah, I'm the best. Like I know what I got to offer. I know what value I'm bringing to it, because people come to me and they're like, oh, I'm here for herpes. And then by the time they leave, they're like, damn, actually, it ain't the herpes at all. Like I'm gonna have to talk about it. Yeah, but man, this is stuff my therapist hasn't even told me. This is stuff I'm paying my therapist $200 a session for. And that's, you know, use your therapist. Like you should go to your therapist, right? But it's, for me, what I'm learning about myself is that I'm invalidating myself, my own identity as someone who is offering these truthful resources and helpful guidance to that's actually going to, you know, make an impact on your life, right? If you decide to implement it. I don't want to do the shortcuts. I don't want to, oh, well, sign up for my ebook, sign up for my course, do this, right? I want to see people go off and live the kind of life that they want to live for themselves. But I'm getting very sidetracked. The direction that I wanted to go with this is, again, just coming back to my own personal like identity crisis of needing to, instead of pushing everything into something positive for positive people, start to separate, you know, what this is for. So I've come to the realization that y'all don't really want yoga classes. Y'all don't really want support groups. What y'all want is a cure. I get that. And it's constantly, you know, I see the success of people, other organizations like the headway that they're making. And people are really like caught up in or subscribe to and will pay for hope. Like there's money being thrown towards cures that before we get to a cure, we got 7 or 8 steps. The same way that before I could get to a place of being at peace with my herpes diagnosis and being as emotionally aware as I am and healthy as I am overall and being as impactful to individuals as I am, I needed to go through those 7, 8 steps before I got to yoga in the way that I'm in it now. And it's the same way for a cure for herpes, right? And people will throw their money at the hope for getting to that place of enlightenment. They'll throw their money at the hope for a place of getting that herpes cure. But why don't we invest in, and I'm not saying throw your money at me, like even if you just tell me, Courtney, I listened to your podcast episode on this and I took your advice and it changed my life. Thank you. That's cool. You ain't even got to tell me. Like, as long as you do it and you good with the results that you're getting or the results that you've gotten, yay. I celebrate that with you. I'm going to celebrate with you. I'm going to ask you if I can share the post because I struggle with being able to show people what I'm doing. I can tell people what's happening all day. I can record transcripts of calls. I won't record anything without anybody's consent, but the podcast is its own thing. But when I have these one-on-one support calls, like there's a lot of healing and impact that's happening that I can't show people. But when we highlight, the destination, right? That when the destination becomes highlighted, that's what people are selling and sold on. But like this whole thing is a journey. And in my personal opinion, I believe that the first step for us getting to that place of a cure is to first accept that there isn't one. I think that a lot of people are in denial of the fact that there is not a cure for herpes. We have not seen herpes test come back positive, somebody go and do a thing and get cured and then it come back negative and this person be able to have sex and not pass the virus on because it's no longer in their system. We don't even have tests that definitively say, yes, you have herpes, no, you don't have herpes. So I think that's really what the starting point is. Why don't we get a test that says, yes, you have herpes, or no, there is no herpes here. Then from there, we can start to test people because a lot of people aren't being tested for it and don't know that they're not being tested for it. People go in, they say, test me for everything, and all of their results come back negative. A partner finds out they have herpes and they're like, hey, I only been having sex with you, I got herpes. And then they're like, no way, that couldn't have happened. They go get tested and find out, oh, you can pass herpes on. I haven't been tested for all these years, and you can pass it on to somebody if you haven't had an outbreak, and then the education begins, right? So what happens if we get an accurate test, we get people tested at least annually for the virus, and then we begin to just simply, before that even, just like start to accept that herpes is, one, a tricky virus. As my board member, Dr. Evelyn Decker says, she says, herpes is a tricky virus. It lives in the nerves, it presents on the skin, and it spreads by skin-to-skin contact. And a lot of people, one, don't know this, right? And two, because of stigma, refuse to educate themselves or be educated by others because we like to just run with what we think we know. And what we think we know is actually not accurate because we're not even getting the experiences of the people who are living with the virus themselves. And that's part of the work that I'm doing. Those first 3 steps is being able to integrate people's lived experiences as y'all allow me to share. The podcast guests who come on and are anonymous or who are fine with being open about it, thank y'all. The people who go and invest the time into taking these surveys that we put together, like that's what this is working towards. I'm not giving false hope for a cure, especially in this lifetime. If we can get these first 3, 4, 5 steps taken care of where people are, more accepting of their diagnosis and the reality of living with herpes and decide to just make some health changes to where, you create a healthy enough environment for herpes to live in your body, along with the other however many viruses and bacteria that live in the body that we don't get upset about, that we don't stigmatized, right? Like how much bacteria in our gut like helps us with digestion. How many viruses live in us that are, handling other things, our immune system, keeping things at bay, not eliminating these things, right? Our body is an ecosystem of ecosystems. And I tell people, like, think of your body as an apartment complex that hosts all these tenants. These tenants are the bacteria, the viruses that don't go away from soap and water, or drinking water and eating well, right? And what herpes does is it just lives in the nerves. And as long as the building is being upheld well, the plumbing's good, the electric's good, and the all of that is taken care of, the temperature's maintained. These are things that contribute to, metaphorically, that are stressors. So if you're overly stressed, if you're not getting your nutrition, if your mental health is trash, if you're not eating and getting the nutrients that your body needs, everybody's different. We all need different things, right? So if you aren't aware of your baseline and able to stay at it, herpes is gonna come knocking on the surface of the skin and be like, hey, let me out of here. It's hot in here. I'm paying my rent on time. I'm taking care of business on my end. You're not taking care of business on your end. You need to fix this air conditioner. And then that's when it wants to get out. It wants to find a new place to live. And that's where you get our high probabilities of transmission. That's where you get your you get your, you get your shedding, your viral shedding. Asymptomatic, that's the word I was looking for. You get your asymptomatic viral shedding, and that's when people get herpes, when we're not taking care of ourselves. I've done these surveys, I'm asking people, I'm asking the questions, I'm interviewing people, but don't nobody know I'm doing it. Nobody knows that this work is being done, because the people who are most impacted by this work are not willing and able to share about it. And this is just because of stigma. Stigma is literally the thing that is in the way of the cure, because until we can accept, all right, this is what stigma is, and you do the work of detangling what's true from stigma. I'm looking like I'm peeling a banana, but we're untangling the stories that we've made up, the media stories, and what other people have said or convinced us to believe about what a person with herpes looks like, what they sound like, what their life must be like. When we detangle our truth from those made up stories, from the misconceptions, from the falsehoods, that's when we can start to talk about curing herpes. But if we don't do that, what incentive do the powers that be have to do anything different? It works, people get diagnosed, they immediately start paying for daily antivirals or antivirals, period. They take the medication because they, A, don't want to have to tell somebody because they're embarrassed because of what people think about people with herpes universally. And then B, like these stressors contribute to more outbreaks, and the less that we actually know about the virus, like from people's lived experiences, the less we understand stigma, the less we understand, hey, this is just how it works, this is all it is, and we see, the less we begin to see herpes for exactly what it is, the less likely there is going to be a need for any kind of change. Because I'm gonna put it like this: if this is the most genius business plan, think about it. You have this virus that, one, people think that they're protected from if they just wear a condom. So people using or not using condoms, right, still go on to get herpes, have no idea they're at risk for it. People don't know that they're not being tested for it unless they specifically ask. The tests are trash, but then when you do get exposed to it, it's going to be very unlikely that you know who it came from. So it's not like you're going to tell the person, like, hey, I think you gave me herpes, right? And we live in a climate where our next available sexual partner is literally a swipe away. So we can have had several partners within the time period at which herpes takes to incubate, and then because of shame and stigma, we're like, oh, I don't know who it was actually, maybe I shouldn't tell anybody. So now whoever else might have had it or been exposed to it doesn't know, for them to go and get tested and then get treated or whatever. But there will come a time though when they find out, bam, the psychological impact is going to be so intense that they immediately get on antiviral. So I've got customers for life as long as people don't find something positive for positive people to be impactful, as long as they don't go within, as long as they focus on the SNL skits that make fun of herpes, the ignorant comments that people make in people's underneath people's posts about herpes, or when they try to educate, or when they are like doing really good education from an entertaining perspective, right? As long as we have this kind of ignorance out there and people don't know that people with herpes are saying that they want to end their lives, and it's not because they're in such pain or because of this virus, but it's because of the stigma of it. It's because of who they see themselves to be, and they think that they have no hope of, you know, finding love or being in a relationship, or they don't want to tell their partner that they cheated on that, hey, I got herpes because I cheated on you, right? So people are really holding on to and maintaining these lies to themselves and repressing these real emotions, and it's being expressed as, oh my God, like I just need to find a cure and all my problems are gonna go away. Let me tell y'all something. I was diagnosed with herpes in 2013. It's been 11 years. Had I been waiting on a cure, where would we be? The thousands of conversations that I've had with people about herpes, that the however many hundreds of one-on-one calls or conversations and posts, and, you know, the inspiration that has come through something positive for positive people through me, had I laid down and been like, man, this is just gonna be my life, I can't wait till they get a cure, and just start throwing my money at cures, like, where else could that money have gone? It went to this platform, it went to this phone, this laptop, this place I'm in now, because I have to, I say have to, and I say that, I mean that. That is very intentional language. I am in a place of purpose. When I try to walk away from this shit, y'all don't let me. And I'm very thankful to y'all, because I think that I needed this just as much as the people who have most greatly benefit from something positive for positive people have as well. Like, we mutually, same side, different side of the same coin. For me, it's been like a positive trajectory. For others, it's been like, you know, maybe starting out negative and getting a little bit better. And I'm thankful to the people who've expressed the importance of this to them, because what that's done is it's held me accountable for doing what I say I will. It's held me accountable for remaining consistent and disciplined with coming on here and sharing these experiences. My therapist, we worked together from 2020 to 2023, and what we talked about was, he said I wasn't really being vulnerable. He was like, yeah, you ain't really being vulnerable. Like, you talking about herpes, you talking about your experience with herpes. And I see it, because I would hide behind the experiences of people who are living with herpes. I'd be like, oh yeah, people with herpes experience this. People with herpes, da-da-da. People with herpes tell me, da-da-da. And just to give you an idea of the inner work I've done, this goes back to my childhood. My parents were separated as long as I can remember. I heard the story. My dad told me it was when I was a baby that they weren't together. So to me, I've always grown up thinking everybody had step parents. Everybody's parents, you know, just they make you and then they go do their thing. But I remember my mom would always tell me to tell your dad you need blank. Tell your dad you need some school clothes. Tell your dad you need a Halloween costume. Tell your dad you need a ride from football practice. And my way of asking would always be, hey, Dad, my mom said da da da. My mama said I need. My mama said I need. My mama said I need. And I was hiding my own feelings of rejection behind my mama said. So if you said no, or if you didn't do it, I'm not being rejected. My mom is, because this is an ask on her behalf. Same thing here, right? I'm not able to receive criticism directly. Like, if you have anything negative to say about me for starting a nonprofit and podcast for people who have herpes because they wanted to kill themselves after their diagnosis, you're a fucking asshole. I have a complete immunity based on that logic, right? Like, that was a childhood thing manifesting here all these years later at age 35, something I remember doing at least when I was in single digits. I remember doing this. And this is the importance of doing the work so that you can untangle the truth from the narratives that you've been fed, the subjective realities of, you know, or the opinions of other people, because in addition to that, like I told myself a story that, oh, my dad just doesn't listen to me. My dad doesn't do what I ask him to. I can't ask him for anything. And the reality is, after talking to my dad and untangling the truth, he was like, you never asked me for anything, right? Like, I didn't think you needed anything. You were so independent. And we had this conversation. So now, instead of having this conversation with each and every one of y'all, I'm recognizing that I no longer need to hide behind something positive for positive people. And shout out to Jordan, one of my other board members as well, for kind of like watering a seed of telling me that, Courtney, people, like, you don't have to put everything into something positive for positive people. People will want to come to an event that's hosted by Courtney that isn't herpes related. And I really sat with that. And here we are months later now, because she said this a few months ago. And I feel it now. I understand what that means. I understand that, like, I don't have to hide behind these things. And what my therapist said to me about hiding or not truly being vulnerable is absolutely true. And I ain't gonna say I'm done with it. Like, there's still gonna always be work to be done, but I'm aware enough. I said aware, like pointing at my head, but I'm aware enough in my core, in my heart, that, excuse me, I'm aware enough to know that something's got to change. I know that I got to stop hiding, and I'm working on that. Like, I'm hiding these brilliant skills of interviewing people, of podcasting, of being curious, and drawing out these very fucking powerful and vulnerable conversations and realizations from people who I'm interviewing people, everyday people. These are people who have never been interviewed before, y'all. I'm fucking amazing at my job, interviewing people and being curious about people. And it translates not just on the podcast, but also in the one-on-one calls, and also in when I'm making friends or meeting new people and getting them to discover new things about themselves. And I do this in a very, like, short period of time. It's efficient. And I'm very aware of the undercurrent of conversations, not just the things that a person might be saying, but also the things that they're not saying. What's the emotional undercurrent of their words and their silences, right? This is a fucking superpower. Like, I don't know too many people who know how to do that. Like, shout out to my boy AJ. I think that he might be the only other person that I know who has been able to do this, because he's done it with me. But I say this because if you are somebody who, you know, has made your herpes diagnosis your identity, you might not even know you made herpes your identity. It's going to take for you to look at what you've missed out on, what you're missing, what you lack. And the only way to get to that place, like, the first thing you got to do is look at what you have. I said this before. What you have is what you want. I think I spoke to that on a self podcast episode, which I brought back, and I'll talk about that later. What you have is what you want, because otherwise you wouldn't be the person you are receiving and holding on to these things, right? Like, it plays out in our relationships, right? You say, I want this, and implying you don't have it, but then you look around and you have something that's not that. So it's important to be able to identify just how impactful your relationships to your herpes diagnosis may be. And the only way to really do that is to start reflecting and ask these questions. So, like, this ain't me selling y'all on doing a donation-based support call. If you want to, yay, cool, come do it. But what this is more so about me being open and vulnerable myself, and sharing, here's how I recognize my identity has been so interconnected with my herpes diagnosis. Here are ways that I've violated my own boundaries. Here are ways that I've violated myself. Here are ways that I've invalidated my own identity as a person, as a man who, you know, is being of service, at least in my personal opinion. I think I'm being of service. And I feel that because in the conversations that I have, I see people's posture changes. People, like, come in on these calls and they're like this, or they come to these interviews, they're like this. Eventually they're like this. Eventually they get, like, real open, and I see that, and I feel that, and I I really genuinely believe that when people listen to this podcast, and now like being able to see my face sometimes when I have guests that let me record and when I remember to do this, I think that this really does radiate and activate people in a way that they begin to challenge their own internalized stigma. They begin to activate their own faith in themselves and begin to live in their own truth. This is funny because my mom said that she said I had a dream that you were like a public speaker. I never wanted to be a public speaker. I thought I was just like a behind the scenes advertising creative guy, which I am making commercials, or I have had those experiences making commercials. But here I am like feeling that. Like I really feel that. I feel, like podcasting has helped me. The herpes education advocacy has helped me to really identify who I am. In addition to who I'm not. And who I'm not is, I'm not my fucking diagnosis. I'll tell you that right now. The experiences, the skills that came after I received my diagnosis, those make up parts of me, but that itself is not who I am. And I very much can communicate now way better than I could before what something positive for positive people is. What we're doing with something positive for positive people moving forward is we're going to continue to, do these surveys. We're going to do the research because it helps with our advocacy efforts to integrate the lived experiences of people who have herpes into STI or sexuality education, so that people are able to take those non-sexual components of our lived experiences and what we learned after that we didn't have, that if we had before might have changed the trajectory of our mental health or emotional well-being as well. We want to integrate those into sexuality education so that it translates into STI prevention. It ain't no reason that by now I ain't got funding from the CDC to implement this and talk about this more and have a bigger platform and make this a more expansive community resource. Like I'm running, how much the conference that I did, the Something Positive conference, we sold like $7,000 in tickets, and then we had about $5,000 in sponsorships, and then we were able to pay our presenters, and we were able to take some of that money and invest into another expo where we're going to have more community engagement, where we're going to be able to support people in navigating these conversations about sexual health and disclosing their STI status and asking people about theirs, the very things that directly impact the STI rates. People aren't talking about STIs nearly as much as they should be. And here we are, we have this work that's being done, and it's just me. Like I'm learning to ask for help. Shout out to my board member Amber, who's telling me, Courtney, you need to find some volunteers, you need to get some interns, like you need help until we can get to a place of acquiring funding to be able to go off and do, more of the work that is being done. And I'm listening. I hear y'all, I hear everybody, I listen, but at the end of the day, like I feel very much like this is still something that other people aren't nearly as invested in as I am. Like I said, I tried to walk away. I can't walk away from this because when I do, somebody tells me, Courtney, please don't stop doing what you're doing. I was going to end my life and I found your podcast and it saved my life. Thank you. Here's a donation. Sometimes everybody don't say here's a donation, but people, have thanked me. People are like, oh yeah, I found the love of my life and I had the confidence to disclose thanks to you. And I can't show this. And that's like part of what the struggle is. So before it sounds like I'm just bitching and complaining about like people not telling people that this exists, I want to be clear that there are very wonderful things that happen. We got a $10,000 donation from Dr. Eveline Dacker to go on and conduct a pilot project for one of the trainings to be able to have a simulated experience using sex educators to give medical professionals practice taking a history under a specific type of circumstance. So I'm going to be doing that in February, and that is essentially what the business plan is for Something Positive for Positive People. And then the podcast, the research that we're doing, I'm going to continue to interview people and host a podcast, and also be able to offer the donation-based one-on-one herpes support calls. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a mental health professional. Like, I'm an emotional wellness practitioner. I utilize my yoga. I utilize my own personal experiences and the experiences that have been shared with me as we navigate these conversations. And these donation-based calls are going to be, they're 30 minutes. You make a donation, we schedule the call, we have the call, and if you want more, I have to direct you somewhere else, because oftentimes people come for herpes and they leave with the realization that there's a lot more that needs to be done, and there might even be a lot more self-inquiry there. And that is where we get back to the identity piece, because I'm now separating that from something positive for positive people. I love y'all to death. I'm sorry, but I can't keep giving y'all what you would pay $200+ to your therapist for an hour and a half, and only getting like $15-20, right? So partially, yes, this is a money thing. I ain't finna sit up here and act like it ain't. Like, it's a money thing, and more importantly, it's a time thing. So that 90 minutes that I'm speaking to someone for them forgetting to donate, because a lot of people forget to donate, or $20 for an hour and a half of like this deep self-reflection and like the relief of getting to emotionally exhaust yourself, and like, because that's what it is. A lot of it is in fact emotional labor. A lot of it is thankless. I don't care. Like, my childhood trauma has equipped me to have this seemingly infinite capacity for emotional, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I'm an emotional lightning rod. Like, I'm a lot of people's emotional boyfriend, and I recognize that. I ain't finna keep tricking my emotional intelligence for free. Yeah, I'm gonna look right in the camera and say that, right? So we got 30 minutes of whatever you donate for a donation-based support call, and then after that, we got to talk about the separateness of it, and that's something that I'm working on now with my own business. I'm not doing speaking engagements through Something Positive for Positive People anymore. That's coming through Courtney. So if you want Courtney to speak about herpes, and unless we're doing the training, right? We do the training, that's Something Positive for Positive People. If we're doing the donation-based calls, that's Something Positive for Positive People. But if you need ongoing consultations, you want to practice your disclosure, like the things that I've tried to push into Something Positive for Positive People, and now they're going to be Courtney things. And I feel very good about this. I feel very confident in this. So the one-on-one ongoing calls, if you're somebody who is curious about or interested in going deeper than just the herpes conversation and talking about, my experience, and because it's been done. The podcasts are out there. There's plenty of free content. There's the social media page. There's the podcast that I've been on. The press page of Something Positive for Positive People exists. You can scroll through all of that and get that. It is most important to me that the time that we spend together is for you to get what it is that you want out of that. All right. And after that, like, I got to get what I need to get out of that. So I'm separating the I guess we would call it coaching. I'm separating the yoga. I don't even like teaching like yoga classes in the traditional sense. But I am currently in yoga therapy school and learning to utilize the science of yoga to support people with restoring emotional balance. So there are yoga classes. If you're a member of Something Positive for Positive People, the Letting Go yoga series is classes of yin yoga meditation for you to work through the emotions that come with the herpes diagnosis. Other than that, you can reach out to me and we can have a conversation about what ongoing conversations and communication can look like. If you need help with your disclosures and things like that, that can be included in the donation-based call. But overall, like, if I need to like get to know you and like get to the core of issues, and you say you got a therapist and your therapist is working for you, hey, I'm not gonna pressure you, but I do a damn good job at what I do, and I got goals. I'm at a place now where I put myself in a situation where I done doubled my rent and my income is like half of what it was when I was in Portland. And so this puts me in a position where not only, and this is something that I think is useful to people as well, it is really easy to get complacent. it's easy to get stuck where you are. It's easy to just, go with the inertia. Is inertia the word? The inertia of, life, and just kind of drifting into where you end up. But then it's another thing to be proactive in choice. I like to think that I empower people with choice. So when you talk to me, you're going to see options, and then you're going to have the responsibility and accountability of making a choice. So even listening to this podcast, if you listen to this point of the episode, you got a choice to make, right? So that choice being, how are you going to navigate these experiences moving forward, right? So I put my experiences out there. I've shared the parallel. My experience with herpes has been identifying with my diagnosis. Your experience with herpes may have been identifying with your diagnosis. So we're two sides, same coin. So for you, what does it look like to begin to take the steps to get out of that thought process, to identify who you are aside from your herpes diagnosis? Who are you outside of that? Because I'm learning who I am. I'm Courtney motherfucking Brain, emotional wellness practitioner. I use yoga, I use sex education. These are the ways that I demonstrate that. I advocate for herpes stigma education awareness. And I advocate for men's emotional wellness. And I started another nonprofit called Self. You can go to getself.org. SELFED is what it is. Getself.org. And the podcast Self is coming back. And that's turning into what it's turning into, which is a men's emotional wellness resource. So that's what I'm about, y'all. Like I'm doing these things, and I'm finally able to identify and break free what I've so mindlessly identified with all this time, which is my herpes diagnosis. And so in separating that, like I'm seeing myself, I'm working with Jordan to do a workshop on intentional relationships and dating and what it looks like to do that. And like I said, I talked about, all the steps that need to be taken before we can get to a place of a cure. I think I didn't finish that. So after, we get people accepting, their status and a good test, and people are tested on an annual basis, know their status, are more educated. I think a lot more people will stop taking the antivirals as often. Farm sales go down, and then they need to do something. They need to make a better medication, or then they need to make a vaccine. And then when it is not doing this on the budget, then that's when we get that cure that's probably already in existence. But even then, why would we want to cure something that isn't really causing a problem? It's the psychological component of it that's causing problems for people, and that won't be healed. We're gonna have a wonderful time with therapists if people don't have the threat or fear of getting herpes, because then people are going to start to experience other more harmful things like heartbreak, right? So yeah, people looking at herpes as the worst thing that ever happened to them. And if herpes is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, you got a good life. I mean that. So that's a really good, this is a good place to leave it. I think that I can stop here. If you feel inspired by this podcast episode, please go to www.spfpp.org/donate, and you can make a donation to support it. You can become a member and access the yoga classes and the events that we host. September 29th is the Safe Sex Expo in New York City, and we're going to be offering workshops on introductions to spicing up your sex life. If you're somebody who's been kink curious, but going to a sex club or a play party has traditionally been way too much for you, and you don't feel comfortable in that environment, the Safe Sex Expo is a really good entry point into learning little things like how to maybe talk dirty or do some light spanking, or to explore your senses in a way that can be it's a way to redefine pleasure. Let me say that. We look at pleasure and we think about it from a sex perspective, but pleasure can be a number of different things. So we got some workshop facilitators that are going to support leading us into some group activities that'll help with being able to dip your toe into the kink world. That's all I'll say about that. And then July 17th, there's a virtual and in-person it's sort of like a herpes disclosure workshop. I'm going to do a live podcast recording with Nikita Fernandez, who is a sex therapist who also has herpes, and she's going to share some of her experience, and then we'll break off and we'll just practice telling each other we have herpes. If you're able to join us in person, please do. Tickets are $25. You can get those on the events tab of spfpp.org, which is spfpp.org/events. And if you can't attend live, you'll be able to attend virtually. It's at 7:30 Eastern Time, p.m., 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. First 30 minutes will probably be the podcast. The next 45 will be mingling and role-playing that disclosure. All right? Till next time, stay pleasure positive. That's what we running with. That's what we gonna run with. Pleasure positive.